publications. And thus, in a view of given situation, today's webinar, we would like to highlight various angles of bilateral relations and comprehensive strategic partnership that both India and Australia have stepped into over MOUs and agreements earlier this month. We have with us Professor Rajagopal Dhar Chakraborty as Chair, who is a professor and head of the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, University of Calcutta. We welcome you, sir. As our speakers, we have Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, who is presently Distinguished Fellow Vivekanand International Foundation. We welcome you, sir. And of course, we have Ashutosh Mishra, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, Chief Executive and Executive Director, Institute for Australia-India Engagement and Editor-in-Chief, India News. We welcome you all, sir. Before we proceed, a gentle request. Participants who are interested to seek an e-certificate or e-participation certificate, do write to us post-webinar, or you can drop in your details to our text box. Now I would like to request Professor Dhar Chakraborty to please take it over, sir. Rajagopal, sir, please take it over.
Thank you, Kankona, for organizing this wonderful inter-country webinar. We here at India, and there are also experts from Australia joining this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all at a particular juncture in history when you know that several countries of the world are required to be united because we have a common factor. We all face a common aggression. Not only our territories are in danger, our economies are in serious peril because of unfair competition from a country. And today, you know that India and Australia, we are at different stages of economic development. We all are familiar that India is still a low middle income country and Australia a high income country. And Australia's GDP per capita is something like 28 times than ours. But at the same time, I must say that India is trying to grow. And we have several indicators which indicate that we are growing. And I just give you an example that motor vehicle production we make a year is several times larger, almost like six times larger than what Australia produces. And you see that our healthcare expenditure, although is much lower than that of Australia, but our education expenditure at the per capita level, or at not at a per capita level, as a percentage of our government budget is almost similar. We spend much more on military than what does Australia present. And you know that because we have to face a neighbor which are not very friendly towards us. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not like to take much of your time, as I have tried to say that the countries in the world today, and in the beginning of this new millennium, they have realized that they have to be united if they want fairness, if they want peace, and if they want their resources to be utilized for the sake of the world peace and for the people of the country. They need some kind of consolidation and cooperation. And I'm happy that Australia has begun to realize India's importance. I understand that we have almost 3% of Australian population, which are Indians. They are doing very well in that country. And we have a significant flow of skilled manpower from India to Australia. And each year, I understand that India sent almost more than 100,000 students to Australia, and they are educated, and most of them are in higher education. So we have a wonderful relationship, economic relationship. Relationship is growing, but you know that the fact remains that Indo-Pacific region is under tension for several reasons. So we require each other's cooperation. At the same time, since we are meeting at a time when the whole world is under COVID-19 pandemic, and Australia is doing it much better than India. Their total deaths is remain stagnant at 104 for several months. But that our numbers are rising, our infection rates are rising. And Australia, I know that, no, as I've told you, Australia spends much more on healthcare than we do. And probably, in today's discussion, we should be able to throw some light on the possible cooperation between these countries on COVID-19, how to fight COVID-19 together, particularly on health and research format. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't like to take no time because you're all waiting to listen to the great experts. And today we have experts like Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. He is a distinguished fellow and is currently at Vivekananda International Foundation. And also we have Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, Chief Executive and Executive Director of Institute for Australia-India Engagement. He's also the Editor-in-Chief of India News. I would first request Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, if you can make his presentations. At the same time, I have request to these participants, and if the participants do not raise any voice, then any questions while the speaker is speaking, at the end of the presentation by the two speakers, we will entertain questions, and when the your participant can ask their question. Over to you, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, please.
Uh, Please unmute, Ambassador.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Professor Chakrabarti. I hope everybody can hear me properly.
Yeah, yeah,
I would
yeah.
first of all like to express my gratitude to the Institute for Social and Cultural Studies for allowing me to speak today at this webinar on a subject which actually is very dear to my heart. I will begin by categorically stating in the beginning that the Australia-India relationship is in excellent shape right now. There has been a virtual summit which has just happened between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison on the 4th of June. And that has actually confirmed the all-round improvement in our bilateral ties. So essentially, I would say that it's geopolitics which has been driven by economics, which has actually given a big fillip to this relationship. The Indian diaspora is now close to 700,000 in Australia. And Professor Chakrabarti, as you pointed out, the Indian student community has crossed the 100,000 mark. And both these numbers have ensured that India figures very regularly now in the political discourse in Australia. In fact, we have now elevated this partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. There's been a joint declaration on a shared vision for maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, and that has laid down a very concrete roadmap for the future. There were about 7 MOUs that were signed during the summit. Well, agreed upon, I would say, not signed, because it's a virtual summit. And that, I believe, would be the basis for the enhanced economic and investment relationship in the future between the two countries. We also have now a mechanism of a 2+2 dialogue with the foreign and defense ministers who now meet regularly, are supposed to meet regularly at least once every 2 years. So that signals the meeting of minds on threats and security issues which face both countries. Now, contrary to what we expected earlier, Professor Chakravarti, the rise of China has not been very peaceful. Asia has faced the brunt of its aggressive policies. There have been some unjustified territorial claims not based on the rule of law. And there have been Chinese policies which are actually aimed at cornering resources, which is quite evident. India is also currently, as you all know, facing multiple incursions on the line of actual control on the Indo-Chinese border. There has been retaliation as far as Australia is concerned, is pressure on trade through enhanced tariffs and anti-dumping measures, which have come about because Australia wanted a independent assessment on the origins of the novel coronavirus, and actually Australia is still recovering from a very vicious Chinese cyber attack, which happened only last week. So China has aggressively moved to establish influence in the Western Pacific as well. In fact, some time ago, there were reports that China was seeking bases in places like Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. And that is worrying for countries like US, Australia, and New Zealand. There's been a quest from China for natural resources with total disregard for transparency and fair practices in their policies towards the Pacific Island states. And again, China has undertaken a number of ocean mapping activities, and there's been an increased presence of the Chinese Navy now in the Indian Ocean, which has sharply increased over the last year or so. Australia and India have therefore reiterated a common approach to a free and open, inclusive, and prosperous Indo Pacific, which guarantees freedom of navigation and overflights. And both have a desire for unimpeded commerce and a rules based order, which is now a necessary strategy. Then we've had a number of joint statements, or actually a couple of important joint statements that support cooperation in multilateral fora. They support centrality of the ASEAN, India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, and also the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is UNCLOS, as well as the peaceful resolution of disputes as opposed to unilateral or coercive actions. Now, I may mention here, Professor Chakrabarti, that in response to the India Economic Strategy report to 2035 that Australia has put out last year, I have been working along with CIA and KPMG team on an Australia Economic Strategy draft report, which is now awaiting final governmental approvals. And this report has identified opportunities across the board in 20 different sectors, and that includes issues like mining, technology, and resources, in data analytics and computing, information technology, financial services, agribusiness, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, education and skills development, railways, automobile components, startups, renewable energy, medical technologies, and infrastructure. And also, there are some futuristic niche areas of cooperation like ferries and shipbuilding, medical and water technologies, textiles and textile designing, digital gaming, and also education technologies, space and defense, which has relevance in the future of what we will do in our aspirational plans. So, if businesses and governments put their efforts together, I think India and Australia have a very bright future. Now, most of the MOUs signed during the Modi-Morrison Virtual Summit on the 4th of June are in line with these recommendations. And I'd like to mention a few examples here. First, we have the implementing arrangement, which concerns cooperation in defense science and technology. And that is an adjunct to the MOU on defense cooperation, which we already have. And that provides a framework for growing collaboration between the technology research organizations in both countries. So the areas which are identified in the draft report for such collaboration include things like advanced sensors, underwater technologies, laser technologies, hypersonic technologies, and also cooperation in shipbuilding between Indian shipyards and Australian shipbuilding industry. Secondly, Prime Minister Modi also conveyed during this virtual summit that India is working on its Mars and Moon missions, and Australia can work with India in collaboration. Already, we've identified things like space situational activities, calibration and validation of satellite data, sharing of oceanographic data, and establishment of ground stations between India and Australia as areas of cooperation here. Thirdly, and this is very important, Australia has reserves of 21 out of the 49 minerals which have been identified by India's critical mineral strategy. And many rare earths are required in manufacturing processes of electric motors, lithium-ion batteries, magnets, and other dual-use products, and of course for the Indian e-mobility program, which is very, very important for the future. So the MOU that has been signed for cooperation in the field of mining and processing of critical and strategic minerals will ensure a long-standing supply and investment relationship between the two countries in the area of critical minerals And this will also ensure that the two countries can collaborate on new technologies for exploration and extraction of minerals. Fourth point that I like to mention is India's large young population and the target that we have for training 400 million people by 2022. That has thrown open a host of opportunities for the Australian vocational education system. And the MOU on vocational education training, which has been agreed upon, will extend this collaboration between Indian and Australian agencies across enhancement of training curriculum. Also, it will align Indian accreditation and assessment to global standards, improve trainer quality, and also it will result in joint training workshops. The fifth area I'd like to specifically mention is a new collaborative arrangement on water resources management, training, and education, and for also developing sustainable solutions for water and economic development and water recycling. So this is all in line again with the draft recommendations in the report. Sixth, we have a Australia-India Scientific Reserve Fund. And this is a very successful example of a research fund which was set up between the two countries back in 2004. And that has seen joint funding for a number of successful projects in areas of life sciences and biotechnology and genetics, etc. So now that COVID-19 is upon us, that has highlighted the need for both countries to strengthen their research and development exchanges and also to provide support for the health sector in both the countries. So during this virtual summit, the two sides agreed through the joint statement to have a one-off special COVID-19 collaboration round based on the Scientific Reserve Fund in 2020. So what this will do is actually use the funding which is available for joint research for a vaccine in this area. And the draft report also recommends a enhancement of the fund. It also proposes setting up of similar funds in the field of humanities as well as in the field of startups. Seventh issue is the flagging of the need to strengthen India-Australia partnership on grains management and also logistics. And that is meant to reduce post-harvest losses, also to rationalize costs and supply chain logistics, and also to set up educational campuses in each other's country. And this is all agreed during the summit. These are all proposals also in the draft report. Finally, I'd like to mention that regardless of India's stand on the RCEP, the report recommends and also the summit has endorsed this, that India and Australia should now restart their free trade agreement, which were stalled due to the RCEP. And there's a lot to gain if this comes about for both countries. Now, a number of steps need to be taken by both India and Australia for translating these MOUs and agreements into reality. So the geostrategic sphere, besides bilateral space, I think both countries need to step up the plate to actively now participate in meetings and in favor of the good. And also the Quad Plus, which is now meeting every week virtually to talk about COVID-19 issues. Also, their ongoing coordination with Japan and Australia, Japan and Indonesia, and for exchanging views on the Australian Pacific setup. And also, India has what is called the FIPIC, which is the Indian Islands Cooperation Forum. So, I think India should also join the US Blue Dot Initiative. Because that will pool in efforts with the United States, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand to come up with a very credible, transparent, and alternate funding mechanism for projects in the Indo-Pacific, which the ASEAN or the Pacific states could then utilize. So they will need to work very closely through the ASEAN, the AEST summit institutions, and also strengthening the international institutions like the WHO. They will strengthen interoperability, share the technological advancements in the defense and strategy spheres, and also look for ways to complement each other. Mutual logistic support which will allow the use of each other's facilities, will increase automatically the interoperability of the defense forces, and also the Australian participation in the Mother exercises could now become a natural chronology. There's also been a framework agreement on cyber and cyber-enabled critical technology cooperation, but that requires a lot of follow-up in the future. There have been opportunities which have been identified in immunology, in different vaccines which I've mentioned, in circular economy, in surface coal black acidification, waste to wealth processes. These will all need to be taken into action. Businesses have to play a very big role here. Also, I believe the state pension funds need to keep themselves abreast and engaged in India's infrastructure development requirements. So all in all, Professor Chakraborty, before I end, I think it has come for a very strong, reliable, and multifaceted relationship between India and Australia. I'll end there, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, for your wonderful presentation. May I now request Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, Chief Executive and Executive Director, Institute for Australia-India Engagement, and Editor-in-Chief of India News, to give his presentation. And we'll have questions answer session after the speech by Dr. Ashutosh Mishra. Over to you, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Chakraborty. And at the outset, I also want to acknowledge and thank IISCS and Arindam and Konkana for giving me this kind invite. And my apologies for being incommunicado in between with regards to this seminar, because as I said, that we were busy with the launch of the newspaper. So my apologies there. But nonetheless, it's a proud pleasure to be here with you all this evening and talk about an issue which is increasingly gaining traction, not only at the bilateral level, but also at the regional and international level. We're talking about the India-Australia strategic partnership, and which, as Ambassador Wadhwa just mentioned, has been elevated to comprehensive strategic partnership. And he has touched upon the various facets of what transpired between the two countries following the virtual summit. So I'll skip that aspect. What I'll do is that in this presentation, I start with what I saw of that virtual summit and how does Australia look at the current evolving scenario in the Indo-Pacific. Where do we see some sort of convergence, in my view, where Australia and India can work and push things. So, as far as the virtual summit is concerned, it was very unique. First of its kind bilateral summit with a foreign leader that we had seen Scott Morrison was having, or even Prime Minister Modi was having. And what struck me was the bonhomie, the warmth, which was coming out of that virtual summit, and I could gauge that from the words that were being used, and how Scott Morrison started his entire thing by saying namaste and mentioning skomosa. And over the years, I think Australian leaders have learned the art of warming up to India by speaking the language that we love, talking in Hindi, tweeting in Hindi. Remember Scott Morrison's tweet saying Modi ji bahut achhe hain, and Prime Minister Modi responding in using an Australian lingo. So this was something which came out of it. And but the other thing that was very interesting in Scott Morrison's remarks was that in his presentation he made two very key references, but brief but very key references, and that was the name of Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, and the Prime Minister of Indonesia, Widodo Jokowi. And that, I think, was very interesting, which showed the kind of outlook that Australia is having at the moment when it's thinking of India. If you look at Prime Minister Narendra Modi, again, the same warmth you could see was being reciprocated by Prime Minister Modi. And when he said that virtual summit cannot be a substitute, and he said to Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and he should come to India as soon as possible. But in the two presentations by both the leaders, there were some very common features which Ambassador Wadhwa has also alluded to, and that is the use of the term democracy, rule of law, mutual respect, accountability, transparency, resilience of institutions. And what was striking was when Prime Minister Modi said that when these institutions in the Indo-Pacific are being challenged, we must all come together. And I think this is now a very potent theme here in Australian policy-making circles. So I think it was a very warm summit, and I think the two sides, as Ambassador Vato also said, the relationship is in an excellent condition. And in fact, Barry O'Farrell, Australian High Commissioner in New Delhi at the moment, he, in fact, a couple of days before the summit, he had said in a speech in New Delhi, he said that bilateral relations are at a historic high. And I think he was not off the mark. They are indeed at a historic high. And I think there is so much of scope for both sides to build relationship further upon. Talking about Australia, how Australia looks at the Indo-Pacific and the current scenario, I see two sort of schools of thought. If you look at the government, how government is looking at the current scenario, and this not just recently, we have seen this evolving over the last year or so, year and a half or so. We had seen the Australian Foreign Minister Marie Spain. She has been openly very critical of Chinese handling of Uyghur Muslims and human rights violations there. She was very vocal in terms of rendering support regards to autonomy to Taiwan, and she was also very vocal in terms of expressing Australia's displeasure with crackdown against on the protests in Hong Kong. If you look at Immigration Minister Peter Dutton, he openly said, Ambassador Wadhwa referred to the hacking, cyber attack, and Peter Dutton had, without mincing words, said that Chinese cyber attack. This was the term actually used. If you talk about Scott Morrison has been sort of very forthright in expressing Australia's angst against China. And what impresses me the most is that a country like Australia, which has an over $230 billion worth of bilateral trade with China, is coming so hard on China, not caring about the backlash, economic backlash. And so this is something really striking, especially coming from a middle power like Australia. And then if you look at Simon Birmingham, the trade minister, at the height of the backlash from China against what Australia was demanding for inquiry into the origins of COVID-19, Simon Birmingham, when the backlash came from China, Simon Birmingham, the trade minister, said that it is time that Australia now was diversifying its business interests with other countries, and he mentioned specifically Japan, European Union, and India. And just today, I was reading one of his statements came in the morning. He said that, again, reiterated that Australia stands for one country and two systems in China, and in a clear reference to what was happening in Hong Kong. So I think these are very bold proclamations coming from Australia, and which clearly sets the mood for things to come in the next months and years, I must say. But on the other side, you have other school, especially led by, say, for instance, people like Peter Varghese, former High Commissioner to India, and who was also the Foreign Secretary of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He believes that indeed, discussions in Australia are very China-centric. But he says that Australia must understand that that we have to engage, but also constrain China at the same time. He says that China is not an enemy, but it is not in Australia's interest to see an authoritarian regime dominate the strategic culture in the Indo-Pacific. And he says that U.S. presence in the region is in Australia's interest, but Australia should not be going with a full-throated containment policy of United States of China. So these are some very interesting remarks he makes. But he does say that we require plurilateral balancing of China in the region, where US, Japan, India, or Australia, Quad plus countries, they all come together. So he does endorse that. And what he says is that it is important for us to remember here in Australia that we have to manage China's ambitions and put constraints where Beijing begins to respect sovereignty and avoid coercion in the region. So he says that we have to differentiate between constraining and containing. He says that constraining is about managing power by Quad and Quad Plus, and all that becomes critical. And containment is about thwarting and weakening. So I think these are very interesting articulations by him. And so, but if you look at how Australia has been, the government has been looking at the Indo-Pacific, is that in 2016 there was a defense white paper, and then 2020 defense strategy update has just come a couple of days ago. Prime Minister released it, and what it says is that Australia seeks to shape the strategic environment, deter any action against itself, and respond with military force. And interestingly, it says that they cannot rule the possibility of a military conflict with Australia. And this is what the strategic update says. And it says that the Indo-Pacific, at the moment, there is a strategic realignment taking place, which is, and at a fast pace, and due to military modernization in the region, which is taking place, technological disruptions, and state-on-state conflict. So what Australia is saying is that herein they see their interests converging with other countries, especially with India. But it also says that they are quite concerned with the activities of China in gray zone activities in South China Sea. And this is the same kind of approach we have seen in Ladakh and elsewhere, where China has been over the years trying to get into gray zone areas and occupy it and then militarize it. So this is how Australian policy making has been looking at Indo-Pacific in recent years. And one very key aspect of, I think, Australian approach to Indo-Pacific has been, which was also hinted at by Ambassador Wadhwa, that was about Pacific Step Up, where the Australians are engaging with the Pacific Island countries. And this is where I think interests with India converge in the region. But for me, I think if you look at from the Indian point of view, you see that India's approach to Indo-Pacific has been articulated again by many people. It's based on 3 pillars, which is commerce, culture, and connectivity. And but at the moment, there's a perfect opportunity where we see Act East going way beyond mere articulations, and you have broader convergence taking place in the region between powers which are quite skeptical to how China has been behaving. And there we see a kind of synergy building between India and rest of the countries in the region. But India's own articulation, basically, I mean, I take a reference point of Prime Minister Modi's own speech at the Shangri-La dialogue, where he says that he had 7-point approach, where free, open, inclusive region, Southeast Asia the center, and ASEAN as the key body. Dialogue, rule-based regional order, equal access to law, to land, sea, and air, rule-based, open, balanced, stable trade regimes, rule-based, just and equal connectivity. So these are some of the elements of India's Indo-Pacific Act East policy, and he highlighted that the key words like respect, dialogue, cooperation, peace, prosperity, Samman, Samvad, Sahayog, Shanti or Samriddhi. So these are some of the key elements of India's Indo-Pacific approach, where I think I see great I think convergence between India and Australia. But one particular aspect which I think is quite interesting and India must delve into is that as I said, that the mood in the government circle here in Australia is really upbeat, and they're really angry with China. As I said, how Maurice Payne, Scott Morrison, Simon Birmingham have been reacting to what China has been up to. And we have recently seen is a huge departure now. New Delhi, I mean, Rajiv Chandra in the UNHRC has gone and said that India is quite concerned about the human rights violation in Hong Kong. So this is a major departure in India's foreign policy. But I think India's Pacific Ocean Initiative and in Australia's Pacific Island countries initiative have got some very common strands, which I think they need to build upon. But I think here there is a common link, I think, and that is Indonesia. I'll mention Indonesia because Indonesia is a key cog in India's Act East policy. And we have seen how in 2018 Prime Minister Modi visited Jakarta, and there was a shared vision of declaration that was signed, which is more expansive actually than India-Australia strategic partnership. So I think Indonesia here is the key, and I think India can play a very important role in bringing also Indonesia and Australia together, because there have been a lot of differences between Australia and Indonesia over the years, and I think India can play a very positive role over here. And I think there is a strong possibility that India, Australia, and Indonesia can start converging their interest in this regard, in dealing with some of the common challenges. So in the end, I'll finish by saying is that when it comes to Indo-Pacific, I see a common convergence apart from strategic and defense and other interests that both sides have, is the PIC, which is the Pacific Island countries. Australia has articulated its approach to PIC countries in 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper, 2016 Defense White Paper, and since then they have been giving a lot of aid to the Pacific Island countries and helping them with climate disaster resilience, sustained economic growth, infrastructure across 12, 14 island countries which are there. And that is something which is very much in common with how Prime Minister Modi established the new desk in MEA. And when we saw in 2014, the Federation of Indian Pacific Island Countries was established by Prime Minister Modi. And ever since, India has been giving a lot of funding to the Pacific Island countries. And one reason is because it allows you to warm up to all these countries, and plus also you have a sizable Indian diaspora there, which can become a very potent source of India's global outreach, and also neutralizing some of the negative influences that we might see coming from China. So I think Australia and India, they can work together also to build their relationship with the Pacific Island countries, and that is going way beyond how we are looking at Indo-Pacific at the moment. So I think, as Ambassador Wadhawa also said, bilateral relationship is at a historic high, and I think both sides, if they play their cards well, they can play a very important role in shaping the future of Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, for your wonderful presentation. Now I would request the participants, if they have any questions, they can ask directly to the speakers. And I'll be very happy if the person who wants to ask a question, if you can introduce yourself and raise your question to the speakers. I repeat once again, and I request the participants to raise questions, because both the speakers spoke so well, and have raised several issues where we Indians can definitely ask questions, and I'll be very happy if you can raise your questions. And before you ask your question, you have to unmute and then you ask your questions, please. Yes.
Okay, this is Krishnendu Bokshi. I have one question for Dr. Ashutosh Mishra. Hello?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Actually, what we have listened till now about the policy of the government, but I want to know what is the mood of the general citizen in Australia in respect of the relationship between Indo-Australia and Australia-China. And the recent hacking of the Australian cyber hacking done by the Chinese hackers. Yes, what is the mood of the general citizen?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Krishnenduji. Outside the government, there are various perspectives, and of course, I mean, we have to understand that different people have got different interests. For instance, if you look at the business community, especially under the shadow of COVID-19, businesses are quite skeptical about making any drastic alterations in Australia's business and trade relationship with China. So they are a bit skeptical about taking such a harsh approach and hard approach towards China. But at the same time, there's also a segment which has lost a lot of money, and businesses have been made redundant. So they are quite angry with China. With regards to the common people, there has been a survey done by Lowy Institute in Sydney. And I've been following that survey for the last 10 years. And what I have seen over the years, something that has changed is that more and more people are beginning to trust India to be playing a more positive role in international relations and international affairs. And at the same time, we have also seen a dip in the perception of common people towards China, and they are saying that China cannot be seen as a very trusted player and a country that can be trusted when it comes to shaping international norms and international politics and international relations. So now more and more people are distrustful of China, and that is something building a very positive, I think, image and impression for India. And given the fact that now there are more and more Indians living in Australia who are playing a very positive role. Australians are now the after Anglophone sort of migrants, Indians are the second largest in terms of paying taxes. Hindi is seen as the largest growing language in Australia. So there is quite a positive I think sort of perception in among the people towards India, and that is something waning when it comes to China.
Australia today. So Australia is in great way dependent on China. Can Australia afford to have a very hard policy with regard to China? Because when your economy is so much dependent, I know that Australia has as yet not signed any OBOR policies, one belt, one road policy. I do not know much about that, whether Australia has signed any kind of agreement on OBOR. But fact remains that the Australian economy is so much dependent on China. So then can Australia really be a very serious player in Indo-Pacific on containing and restraining China on the Pacific? Yes.
Ambassador Vadra, you want to go first?
Okay. So let me say something on it first, and then after that, mainly this answer should be given by Professor Ashutosh Mishra, since he's based in Australia. But I think the way we look at it is that for a number of years, we've had an increasing Chinese influence in both trade and investments as far as Australia is concerned. So what has happened is that big businesses who started dealing with China some years ago, and mainly this was on the back of the commodity exports and boom which Australia went through. Also, the demand for Australian products like milk powder, for instance, and brands of Australia which became popular in China more than a decade ago, that has continued, and that has created its own dependency and market. So even for agricultural produce, for instance, Australian companies still prefer to go to China. And you also have the linkages which have happened in things like rare earths, lithium, for instance, because China was the only country, at that point in time, which offered to process lithium. Now, it's a polluting industry. It's not easy to set up a processing facility. And Chinese came forward looking at the long-term prospect. Now it's become a situation where companies around the world and countries around the world want to diversify and get out of the clutches of the Chinese, but they cannot. So traditionally, the way we look at it is that the Australian big businesses have got comfortable with dealing with China over the years. This is nothing spectacular as a business or investment ties, but at the same time, that diversification drive is now lacking. And if India has to step in and replace China or any other country has to do so, then it becomes that much more difficult unless there is a backing of the big businesses in this process. And that's why when I was speaking, I was emphasizing the fact that there is a need to raise that awareness amongst the businesses in Australia that India is a good market to diversify into. Thank you. You're muted, Ashutosh. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chakrabarty, for your for your question. Yes, it is, as I said, that there are two schools of thought, and you see that that debate here in the media and academic circle and strategic circle, that what is the best way in dealing with China, and it depends on which side are you and what are your interests. With regards to economy, in the wake of COVID-19, one thing I have noticed here that has evolved here in Australia, in strategic thinking and also in government policy making, and that is that now Australia has firmed up its resolve. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So Australia has firmed up its resolve to prioritize sovereign interests over economic interest. So, which, in other words, they are saying that we understand we have got a $230 billion plus worth of bilateral trade with China, but now they are saying what is the cost at which we are having this trade. And they are saying that while we are having this trade, Australia also must be standing up for certain values. And that is where I think they are beginning to look at the larger philosophy that that Australia stands for. And so that debate has started to gain more traction in policy making circle, and that is why you are seeing these kinds of demands for investigation into origins of COVID-19, criticism of what is happening in Xinjiang and Hong Kong and in Taiwan. So this is the way the mood has changed in Australia quite drastically. With regards to students, as you rightly said, China has been sending a lot of students. One of the largest to Australian education, and international education is one of the mainstay of Australia's economy at the moment. But what has changed is that simultaneously the number of Indian students has also been increasing. And in recent years, what has happened is that in Australia, if you people have not sort of come across this book, I would strongly recommend a book by someone called Clive Hamilton. And Clive Hamilton has written a book called Silent Invasion. And in that, he has gone at length discussing what Ambassador Wadhwa was also mentioning, the interference and influence, what he calls influence operations, and how Chinese businesses, Chinese politicians, the Chinese consulates have been interfering in decision making. In educational institutions, they have been paying a lot of money in developing and establishing Confucius institutes, not only in Australia, in liberal democracies around the world, so that they could shape academic writings, and so that more and more people are beginning to write about the peaceful rise of China. So this is how Australia has been seeing at growing Chinese influence. So there was quite a bit of anger against that. Locally here in Brisbane, there's the University of Queensland. There was a confrontation taking place between pro Hong Kong and pro China supporters here in Brisbane, and there was quite a fight going on over there, and the local Chinese consulate got involved. So people have been looking at these kinds of influences, where students are even openly telling the security guards of the university, do you know who we are? We'll call our Chinese consul general. So this is the kind of arrogance you are seeing among students. And even in classes, the students have begun to even challenge and aggressively and brutally counter any academic who's trying to criticize Chinese policies. Today there was a news item in which it was mentioned that because of the Chinese funding that has come in this university, a course in economics in the University of Queensland has mentioned the terrorist activities of Uyghur people. So this is how the courses have actually sort of identified these units unit courses in the university. So the use of term terrorism and terrorist activities of Uyghurs. So this is where you are seeing these kind of China influence come in. There's quite a bit of anger against that. And but I think it all boils down to but there's also this realistic assessment that Australia also understand, and I think the world understand, that alone neither Australia nor India nor any other country has has that capability, apart from United States, to take on China alone. But what Australia is now saying, which is something we are also seeing in India, is that what Ambassador Wadhwa said, the need for diversifying, not diverting, but diversifying business relationship. And that is where Australia is looking at India, European Union, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, and as and when these countries begin to diversify their trade relations with China, we'll see that shift taking place in that what you call the trade dependence on China. But studies here say that the trade dependence of Australia on China is not as much as we perceive to be.
Thank you very much. If there are any other questions, please raise your questions. We are having a very interesting discussions, and I'll be very happy if there are some more questions.
Some question already at a text box.
Look in the chat box. Okay.
So I think there is a question
Yes.
about awareness about India and Australia. From Mr. Dattatray. Well, let me take that on first. After that, Ashutosh, you can have a go. Um, I think there is a shifting trend here again, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, because of the fact that we have now 700,000 diaspora from India in Australia, and we have more than 100,000 Indian students now in Australia. Obviously, the discourse about India has changed because they are much more active, and it's going to be bound to become enhanced in the future. Second issue is that both sides have been trying to make sure that more is known about their culture in each other's countries. There have been regular festivals of India, for instance, that have been held in Australia. These have been very, very successful. There is also a changing trend about the food, ready-made Indian food, which has started to begin to be sold in supermarkets in Australia. And the Indian associations are playing a very active role. The number of them is also going up considerably. One of the examples of how this is happening is through publications. Ashutosh himself has just started a very nice magazine. The initial issue came out, and he was telling me now it's a 32-page magazine. So there is a lot of interest about in people to know about each other. We've been trying in India to encourage Australia to send more students to India through the Colombo Plan initiative. And also, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, during the virtual summit, he actually said that the Australia-India Youth Dialogue could play a very important role in bringing, the youth together and to organize a hackathon between India and Australia, which will happen later this year. These people, the India-Australia Youth Dialogue, also have tied up with alumni who have been on Australia and who are engaged in various fields in India now. And they're playing a very important role in major cities in India to further the cause, or the cultural cause, and the people-to-people connect between the two countries. So I think things are improving. And one of the issues that we have recommended also in the report that I've been engaged in is ways and means on enhancement of tourism contacts and tourism, learning from best practices, making sure that more Australian tourists come to India. And of course, as far as Indian tourists to Australia are concerned, during pre-COVID days, we actually saw a 23% rise in the previous year. So that's an excellent trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, for mentioning all these aspects. And yes, this is a wonderful question. Actually, in one of the key challenges that both sides actually face, how to boost the understanding of India and Australia and vice versa. And this is something that I had noticed here ever since I moved 14 years ago to Australia. And that was something I always was mindful of. And that's why we started working with like-minded people, and that became the key driving factors of establishing the Institute for Australia-India Engagement. And our motto says that the deeper we understand each other, the better we engage. And when we were actually establishing this institute, we had met with Ambassador Peter Varghese, and we said that we are bringing about this institution, and what do you think is the future for institution like these in Australia? And he said that that institution like these have got a huge role to play in the years to come in Australia. And he said Ashutosh, if the institute could simply achieve this one goal, that is increasing the awareness of Australia and India and India and Australia, I think it would have fulfilled its founding objectives. And which actually shows that in order to have stronger and deeper relationship, you need to bring the people together, and for that it is important for both sides to understand. And as Ambassador Wadhwa has highlighted, there's India-Australia Youth Dialogue. And what has happened in Australia in the last 10 years or so, that under Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, there was a white paper which was prepared, which talked about Australia in the Asian century, and that is where they started looking at the rise of Asia, the rise of India and China in the Asian century, the evolution of the Asian century. And they said that it is important for Australia now to understand the region better, the countries better, and also not just in terms of economics and trade, but also in terms of culture and the pulse of these countries. And this is where I've also been writing a lot in the press here and also in my papers, that in order to have a very strong relationship, it is important that Australia also invested in upping its own Asian literacy. And that's why I was saying that Australia must look into introducing languages in Australian schools at the primary level, because language, because you have got immersion programs in a lot of schools. You've got Spanish, you've got Chinese, you've got French, you've got German, and students as a part of that immersion program go to these countries. But Hindi doesn't have that kind of status here in Australian schools. So we have been saying that Australia must now, given the sort of rise in bilateral relationship, invest more and more into languages. And here I must mention that one good program that Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has is the New Colombo Plan. Under the New Colombo Plan, every year 150 students from Australia go to different Asian countries. They spend time, they do research work, they talk to people, they engage with them, and they basically are going as Australian ambassadors and come back as ambassadors of India or the host country, wherever they are going. I think this is a very good program. But I think, Professor Chakravarti, and I think in my response, I would also ask, sort of a counter question, and that is that, I mean, you all would be in a good position to answer that what is the level of importance that is being accorded to courses on Indo-Pacific in Australia, specifically in the curriculum in the universities and graduate colleges, because we need to have those kinds of things being pushed from both sides. So, and I think institution like IAI has its role cut out, but I think it's also important that at the government level, we have these kinds of push coming in at the university level, at the primary level, school level, wherein we are generating those kinds of interest in people and in students up early.
Hello. Yes. I mean, have you finished? Hello.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, just to answer your questions, I mean that we do not have any regular Indian university curriculum on the Pacific. Okay, only some specialized courses on international relations do mention about Pacific countries. But your suggestion is very important and interesting. And yes, we in the universities here in Bengal would definitely try to incorporate your suggestions, include more of them in the history and geography, international relations, wherever possible. I will raise it in educate fora, and we will also appeal to the university monitoring agencies in India. That if we have to foster good relationship, people contact with other countries, particularly the Indo-Pacific, we have to have more content. So with regard to that, those countries in our syllabus, I really endorse your suggestion. It's a wonderful suggestion. And if we are really interested in a proper friendship, we need to implement that. But I have another question. I mean, you do not know that Dr. Ashutosh Shiltins were placed in Australia, and you see that when the COVID-19, they started, we all were very much upset that this endemic will sweep over Australia because so much of Chinese students and visitors come in. We have seen what devastating role the Chinese students played in Iran. We have seen how Chinese tourists and investors played a devastating role in Italy. But you know that in whole of Australia, as yet, only 8,000 people have been infected by COVID-19, and there is only 104 deaths. So what is the miracle? What is the miracle? If you can share with us, we have 6 lakh people, 600,000 people already infected, and we have a death, 19,000 deaths already, and we do not know where we will go. And if you can share with us, what did Australia do to ensure that COVID endemic do not spread much? I mean, that just that we could share it so that we can listen to all of us. Yes.
I think Professor Chakravarti, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we here only have a population of 24 million, and the density of population is very, very low compared to India. Here houses are at distance, they are not cluttered, together, and so what happens is that if you juxtapose India in that setting, you have millions of people who are living in suburban and rural areas, so close to each other. And plus, also, Australia didn't have the problem like we have seen in the form of the mass migration of migrants in India. Here in Australia, and I can tell you, they are in complete awe. People are in complete awe of the fact the way India has tackled COVID-19. And they are saying that with a country with the size of 1.3 billion people, they are saying that India has done exceptionally well. And the numbers here, that we are dealing with, because here in Victoria now there's a second wave coming. So from Australian point of view also, there have been a lot of lapses. For instance, in Sydney, there was a cruise which was allowed to dock in Sydney, and over 2,000 passengers were allowed to disembark without proper health checkup and testing, and that led to the outbreak of initial 200 cases in New South Wales, and then so that was the that was the Jamaat, or what you call the migrant movement for Australia. But in states like Queensland, where we are based, the first of all, the awareness in general hygiene and cleanliness, and civic sort of responsibility that people understand in terms of playing their own role, and plus the infrastructure and the resources which are available to implement issues, sort of social distancing and things like that. So to combine all that, so Australia has been able to sort of contain this, but in Australia, the leaders and people also acknowledge that if they are faced with a population like India, it is extremely difficult to control and contain. That is why I think Prime Minister Scott Morrison had such high praise for Prime Minister Modi and India, how they have tackled COVID-19.
Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, we are really elated to hear this. Do you want to react to any of the questions and remark on the chat boxes?
Yeah, I would also just give a caveat, sort of footnote here, Professor Chakravarti. We are talking about creating awareness. So here at the institute, we would be deeply inclined to build academic and research engagement with institutions over there, doing joint research and things like that. So my email is with Konkna and Arindam. So we look forward to sort of seeing and building those academic and research linkages.
So thank you very much, both Professor Ashutosh Mishra and Dr. and Ambassador Vanir Vadira. And is there any other questions? You are already running out of time. Is there any other questions? You know that both of them will be very eager to answer. Yes.
Well, there are some questions in the chat box, Professor Chakravarti.
Chat box. Yes.
There are some
Yes.
questions in the chat box, and I'll very quickly, because we're running out of time, so I will
Yes.
try to answer some of them. First of all, Arindam Mukherjee has asked about IORA. I think that's a very pertinent question in terms of India and Australia, because India and Australia have been the pillars of this organization. They've actually initiated and run a number of programs in cooperation with each other. And I must say the cooperative programs that India and Australia run in the East Asia Summit context is also quite exemplary. And something similar has happened in the IORA organization as well. IORA, as you know, has done some enormous work in terms of development related projects, especially in the coastal areas and fisheries, animal husbandry and stuff like that, where because it's an organization which is based on the littoral states of the Indian Ocean, and these 22 states, between them they have a lot of commonalities. Security, of course, is one of them, but security has been kept out of the purview so far because it leads to controversies. So the way it's progressed is, concentration on development projects, cooperative projects, and how you could bring in funding from outside for specific countries which need them. So far, doing very well, and I think this should be strengthened, and the cooperation between India and Australia should be strengthened in that context. I have a question also from Rimli Basu, who's talked about cultural influences in the Indo-Pacific, Indian cultural influences. Again, an excellent question. Historically, India has played a big role in the Indo-Pacific, and if you see those linkages, they have not died down. In fact, what India is trying to do now is to revive a number of these linkages, especially through the ASI, for instance, where we have undertaken a number of excavation renovation projects. The arts forms, which where we have a very strong linkage, have also been revived. There is continuously an attempt through the ASEAN, for instance, to take up projects where India and the ASEAN countries can do cooperative projects which revive these ancient linkages. We also even had a car rally, for instance, very recently. These car rallies have taken place continuously over the last few years. And that is because we are building, as you know, a trilateral highway connecting India's northeast through Myanmar into Thailand and beyond. And for that purpose, it's very important to show that the connectivity exists and that can be improved. Again, in terms of restoration of ancient heritage, a number of projects in the Buddhism field have been undertaken. So there's a constant effort there, and I think India will continue to concentrate on these projects in the future. There's one question about improvement of India's performance and policy. Mr. Bakshi has asked this question in Australia. I think as far as policy is concerned, we are quite on the right track. And as I outlined in what I spoke, the number of things that have happened recently, there's no dearth whatsoever of initiatives and policies. But yes, in performance terms, we've got to translate that into action. It's very important that the organizations on both sides, especially the businesses, they take this up in all seriousness, because I think it's a time now that the businesses looked at each other very, very seriously. In terms of the governments pushing the projects, they're getting more and more involved. So if you take issues like defense and space, for instance, that cannot be done entirely by the private sector. So governments have to be involved there, and I think the governments are taking that initiative in a much bigger way, and a bigger role is being played right now. One last question was from Dattatreya Vajwale, and he talked about I think the international this is the International Association for International Intercultural Education. Now, yes, it's a very important organization which plays its own unique role, and I think it can supplement what the India-Australia Youth Dialogue is doing in terms of bringing awareness amongst the students and the youth about each other's countries. Uh, I don't think we have done much over there, though. Certainly worth looking at for continuing this linkage as well.
And I'll just quickly add here to what Ambassador Wadhwa has said is that with regards to Rimli Basu's ji's question, that India has a huge, I think, I would say, fan following in the Indo-Pacific, and I had seen it firsthand. Couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, we were doing delivering a capacity building program for the Indonesian law enforcement agencies in corruption eradication. And I was surprised to see that many of these police officials, they were doing the namaz and everything, and their name was Bhakti, and they were Muslims, but their name was Bhakti. And some of the souvenirs that were given to us after the program were taken from the acts of Mahabharata and Ramayana. So these are the dominant symbols of Indonesian culture, and you can win an Indonesian heart if you can sing a song from a Bollywood. So this is what I saw in Indonesia. Similarly, when I had gone to Cambodia, what Ambassador Wadhwa was mentioning in terms of restoration, I had seen the Archaeological Survey of India, such a stellar job they have been doing in Cambodia and Siam Reap in restoring some of the ancient monuments in Angkor Wat and other places. They're playing, and so this is all that is getting you some very strong and positive friendship in the region with the people and also with countries. With regards to policy and performance, one quick thing, one sort of complaint we keep listening here in Australia is that when Australian businesses are going to India, it takes a long time, and sort of in terms of files being passed, and although India has improved in the last 7 years, India has improved. That's why it's gone up in ranking in terms of ease of doing business. But with regards to corporate houses here, they say that they don't know how files get lost and it takes a long time in getting approval. But I think things are changing now, and there's a much deeper appreciation here in India, here in Australia, with regards to efficiency of Indian government bureaucracy and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I understand that Mr. Krishnendu Bakshi will have some announcement to make on behalf of the organizer. Yes, over to you, Krishnendu Bakshi.
Yes, so we had a very lively discussion today, and on behalf of our organization, Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, we are very much thankful to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa and Dr. Ashutosh Mishra for their presentations and taking time and their energy in answering the various questions. We have already run out of time, and we are also very much thankful to Professor Rajagopal Dharchaudhuri for very nicely coordinating the whole program. We are also thankful to the audience who have participated in the program. Today is a working day, and it is a working time. It is the official office hours. Still, our friends have managed to attend this program, and we are also thankful to them. And we think that this is our first attempt in India-Australia relationship, and in future we shall take the matter more seriously, and we shall organize more programs on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bakshi.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.